Good morning. Is the microphone working? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this panel. My name is Thomas Hanitzsch. I have the pleasure of moderating this session. I would also like to thank Sandra Braman for putting this panel together, and thanks to Jeff Pooley for managing the hybrid part of the panel, and also for drafting the questions, some of the questions for this panel. So as you see, it's a collaborative effort that we put together here. Well, as a way of introducing to this panel, let me say this. Peer-reviewed academic journals are the lifeblood and the lifeline of our discipline. They are the public face of this association and key to its mission. Some of you may have noticed that this year's ICA conference features several panels on scholarly journals. I was not surprised. For one, such preoccupation reflects the relevance of these journals to our discipline. At the same time, I believe the celebration of ICA's 75th anniversary provides an excellent opportunity to critically reflect on our academic journals' past, present, and future. So here's the record. ICA runs 6 journals, plus one, I should mention. One Journal of Communication since 1951, Human Communication Research, 1974, Communication Theory, founded by Bob, who is here among the panelists, in 1991, Journal of Computer-Mediated Communication, 1994, Communication, Culture and Critique, 2008, and the Annals of the International Communication Association, founded in 2017. Some of you may know that the Annals grew out of the Communication Yearbook. And ICA just introduced a new journal. Nick Bauman was here, or is he still here? So now ICA has 7 journals. Oh, there he's coming. Nick Bauman is the editor of the new journal that ICA has created. So, like other scholarly journals, ICA journals serve a triple function: intellectual, strategic, and economic. On the intellectual level, journals offer a platform for researchers to share results and conclusions from empirical and conceptual discovery. Normatively speaking, our journals nurture academic discourse and drive disciplinary development. A telling example is the original Ferment in the Field, a special issue of Journal of Communication published in 1983 under the editorship of George Gerbner, who had edited the journal for 17 years. In addition to its primary role as convener of intellectual discourse, journals also have a strategic function in the field, particularly in the realm of professional development and career evaluation. Journal publications are often, perhaps too often, considered the main currency of academic reputation. Third and finally, academic journals also have a significant economic value. The publication industry capitalizes on researchers' intellectual property and the unpaid labor of editors and reviewers, which eventually turns into revenue. Industry publishers worldwide respond to demands for open access by flipping their business models around. In many of these scenarios, subscription revenue is gradually replaced by article processing charges paid by paper authors and their institutions. To be fair, ICA is a significant player in this area. Around 1/3 of the association's annual revenue is generated by our journals. In the following, I will discuss the state of our journals with 8 current and former editors of ICA journals. It's actually 7 now, but I will explain it a little later. After introducing the panelists, we will have 3 rounds of questions focusing on the past, present, and future, respectively, followed by a response from Jonathan Cohen. After that, we will open up and invite the floor to ask questions and provide commentary. Now, let me introduce the panelists one by one in alphabetical order. Sandra Braman is Professor of Media and Information and Senior Scholar at the Quelle Center of Media Information at Michigan State University. She edits the Information Policy book series in the MIT Press of the MIT Press, and she was editor of the book review section of the Journal of Communication, which included a full 1994 special issue devoted to books. It's titled Books on Books on Books. Jonathan Cohen is a professor of communication at the University of Haifa. He has served as associate editor for communication theory and as co-editor and then consulting editor of human communication research. Robert Bob T. Gregg is professor emeritus of communication at the University of Colorado Boulder. He was the founding editor of communication theory and has chaired the ICA Publications Committee. Among many other editorial engagements, he was the founding series editor of the ICA Handbook series. David Ewoldsen is a professor in the Department of Media and Information at Michigan State University. He aided in transitioning the communication yearbook to the Annals of the International Communication Association. So he was the founding editor of that journal. Prior to that, he edited Media Psychology and Communication Methods and Measures. He currently co-edits the Journal of Communication. So he's been probably an editor for his entire life. James Katz is the field professor of emerging media at Boston University and board of professors, Governors Professor of Communication, emeritus at Rutgers University. He was the editor-in-chief of Human Communication Research and is currently co-editor-in-chief of Communication and Change. Radhika Parameshwaran is Herman B. Wells Endowed Professor at Indiana University, Bloomington. She served as editor of Communication Culture and Critique, as a member of the FSD Helen Awards Committee, and as a member of the ICA Publications Committee. Sheizaf Rafaeli was supposed to be here as one of the panelists, but he told us this morning that he's in a bomb shelter, so he won't be with us. And finally, Silvio Waisbord is a professor at the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University. I'm now getting used to introducing Silvio. And he's the editor of the International Journal of Communication. Also, he is the former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Communication and the International Journal of Press Politics. He just finished his term as president of ICA. My own biography connects to the colleagues I just introduced in many ways. I was editor-in-chief of Communication Theory, the journal founded by Bob. Jonathan Cohen was one of my associate editors by the time. I've been serving the Annals of the ICA as an associate editor since its beginnings in 1927, at a time under the leadership of Dave. Together with Karin Wahl-Jorgensen, I inherited the ICA Handbook series from Bob. And last but not least, I just succeeded Silvio in the line of ICA presidents. So now, let me start by asking the first question, and that question is related to the past. So we have three questions, as I mentioned. First, we start talking about the past, then present, and then future. First question goes like this. Can you please reflect on how your journal has affected an intellectual development in the field, or perhaps subfield, at the journal's moment of creation, perhaps and/or on its subsequent life? Please keep your comments brief and limit yourself to a single example. Who wants to go first?
Bob Craig. I was the founding editor of Communication Theory. The journal published its first issue in 1991, but the decision to create the journal was made really in the late 1980s. And at that time, the need that was perceived for this journal, I think, arose out of the sense in the field that we were developing as a discipline, but that in order for that to happen, that we really needed to develop more of a theoretical core in the field. And there were really, I think, three aspects to that. One was what was referred to as the intellectual trade deficit, that we tended to rely on theories from other disciplines, and we're not generating original theory of our own. A second component of it was the fragmentation of the field, which is in a way much greater now than it was then, but it was often framed in terms of a split between mass communication and interpersonal communication, and those subfields were developing separately with their own bodies of theory and so the discipline as a whole lacked a core. And then I think the third aspect was paradigm diversity, that interpretive and critical work had begun to take a much more prominent role in the field in the 1980s. And so there was a concern about sort of epistemological fragmentation or lack of dialogue. We couldn't have a core, we couldn't have a theoretical core because these different paradigms were not really communicating with each other. So the mission of communication theory as a journal was to solve this problem, essentially, that we were going to create a theoretical core that would bridge the divide between mass and interpersonal communication, that would develop paradigm dialogues and sort of reverse the intellectual trade deficit. So I guess, the question is that was the goal in creating the journal. I think the extent to which that goal has been achieved, over the years is really an open question. I do think that we have a lot more original theoretical work in the field, and theories of all kinds, different epistemologies, different subfields, and so forth, all appear within the communication theory journal, and so, at least to that extent, the journal has served the purpose that it was created for. Although I'm not sure we have the theoretical core that was envisioned in the 1980s. Someone else?
How do we turn this on? Can you hear it? That's probably best then if you can't hear it.
It's working. It's working. It's running.
Oh, okay, it is working now. Okay. It's much easier than handling that back and forth if we have this. The Annals was, initially it was started as yearbook, and I'm not going to address that because that's not why the journal was developed. As I understood it at the time, the Annals came into existence because of ICA's commitment to internationalizing the organization, that it was nearly impossible in large parts of the world to get a hold of yearbook because it was only in print form, and the publishers weren't willing to put it out in a non-print form. And so starting a journal was a way to get around that, so that would be greater availability to the discipline. I think the journal has done that to a certain extent. Herman Wasserman put together, he was one of the associate editors, he put together a special issue on the Global South that I think was outstanding. I selected associate editors from around the globe. That was very important to me. I think it was held back a little bit by what I've now come to realize is sort of a colonial mentality towards publishing, and I apologize for that, that I still was taking a Western model of what should be a publication and what should be theory, and that was incorrect, and I apologize for that. I still think we made progress with that, and I think Herman has done an excellent job. He was the editor after me, and he is just stepping down as editor, and so I think the journal helped with that and helped increase understanding the diversity of views about what are important issues for us to be handling. I think it could have done a better job had I realized some of my own blinders, but I think it's doing a good job of that.
Thank you. I think I'm here because I edited a Journal of Communication 2015, 2019. So just a few thoughts. I think there is more. I think the invitation, to me, is an opportunity to reflect upon the way that we approach editing a journal. And this is what I want to say very briefly. So when I started editing JOC, I thought about what kind of journal is this? And of course, everybody knows it's the flagship journal of the association for decades. I'm not sure, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, that whether or not there is a history dedicated to JOC, but I mean, there is sort of an understanding, a perception of being the flagship journal should represent communication studies, ICA, sort of in its whole sort of variety and diversity. So it's different from editing a more niche journal or a journal that is not associated with an association. The first journal that I edited, Press and Politics, was not associated with organization. The journal that I'm editing now, International Journal of Communication, not. So it is, that was my first thought. So this is a journal that needs to reflect the diversity of the organization and communication studies. It's a generalist journal, so we continue to add new areas of interest, new divisions. The journal should reflect that. It should be global, because that is the perspective that I propose when I was, when I apply, and given what's going on in the field, pretty much along the lines of what David just said, and aware of the challenges of making a truly global journal, given much of what we know about disparities and inequalities in a number of ways, then that is a challenge that even after 4 years, I was not clear on how to do it or how a single journal can address or correct some of the problems that exist, that are structural problems, go beyond what a single journal or even one association can do, but we have to try. And then the limited space, you can have great work, but you cannot publish everything that reviewers say yes. Typically, I think reviewers believe in second chances or third chances, but you have limited space, so you have to make that editorial decision. And finally is that this is the kind of journal that pretty much everyone would like to have published something for a number of reasons, including for tenure, right? So it cannot be a journal that only appeals to a fraction of the association or communication studies, because for many scholars, and that I heard from many people, it is great, it is expected in some departments, in some schools, that you will publish in the Journal of Communication. So then the question is how you, given all the expectations that are built into a journal like that, and your vision, how you make it happen. And to me, that was one of the most wonderful intellectual exercises, challenges in my career. And that goes to what Thomas was saying earlier, these three levels of a journal: the intellectual level, the professional development, and the economic side. So I could go on, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on an early Sunday morning. I'd like to begin with a story. I was at ICA in Miami more than 2 decades ago on a panel with George Gerbner, and he and I debated the future of communication formats. And he was arguing that Hollywood would be making fewer and fewer, more and more expensive movies, and that would be the wave of entertainment in the future. I, at the time working at Bell Communications Research, argued that people would be having personal technology that would allow them to make their own entertainment media, and that this would be the vector of the future. Well, it turned out we were both right. The reason I mention that is because when I took over as the editor of Human Communication Research, I wanted to have more visual presentation of data, and that was my core mission. And I have to say, we've heard an apology. I have to apologize. I failed. I was not able to get very much, maybe one article in the years I edited on visual presentation of data. But I still, after 20 years, believe that this is the wave of the future. And also mentioning Silvio's point about getting too many journal papers, I think the format of high prestige journals is under great assault through many other modes of publication. And indeed, there's a small movement growing to not list the journal that your article is published in, so that people can take it on its own merits and not be lifted by the other prestige markers that may not be appropriate for the intellectual quality. And two more points. One is that in line with my desire to see more visual communication, I wanted to change and make much more lively and easy to read the cover of the journal, which at that time heavily was publication paper-based, because it had a dark brown cover with very small knockout letters for the contents, making it very difficult to read. And I felt if we're a field of communication, we should apply our knowledge about how to communicate to the journals that we edit. And this was another area in which I failed. I was told, no, there can be no changes in the logo, in the layout, in the coverage, and in that dark brown kind of mortuary flavored cover that I had. And the final point, so that's the point of resistance of organizations to innovations that could benefit the organization. Final point is, I was so happy to make so many new friends by becoming the editor of the high prestige journal in the field. So many people started coming up to me at conferences, buttonholing me, telling me how much they liked me personally, and that they had a article they'd like me to take a look at. So there's also, I guess, individual rewards that transcend the academic prestige. Thank you.
So this is on. I'm here representing book reviewing, sort of across journals, although my experience is with Journal of Communication. I'm going to borrow briefly from my present and future time to give a bit of discussion about what's actually going on with book reviewing. So the frame is, what in general is the relationship between journals and books? For the authors, you're trying out material for your books, you're taking part in an ongoing intellectual conversation and trying to move it forward, often as you move yourself towards a book. And when you have a book, you're also marketing a book by putting out a journal article. For publishers, there's a marketing of authors. There was a point in the late 90s when Sage said they were going to launch 100 new journals. And all I could think of was that's not only about marketing to libraries, so subscriptions, but that they're marketing authors. All the authors who are getting out in the journals are then people they can promote for books. And then for journals, of course, moving the intellectual conversation forward. In the 5 years I was book review editor of the Journal of Communication, we published an average of 80, we reviewed an average of 80 books a year. There were multiple genres, so the single book review that we're familiar with, the review essays, so somebody's reviewing 2 to 5 books, a group of books on a shared topic or theme or in some way related. I did 10 books in brief, a paragraph each in each issue. In the full journal issue, which was given to me after Mark Levy, a decade later, wanted to replicate the Ferment in the Field issue that was mentioned with 2 issues of the future of the field, and then gave me the full issue. So we had full journal articles. So we had Michael Sheizaf do a journal article about textbooks, for example, and the great Johanna Drucker did her first writing on artist books that ultimately became several books by her about the history of artist books. And then we have another innovation with the current Journal of Communication. So there's a lot one can do. How do you choose the books? Again, I wanted to echo what Silvio said, that Journal of Communication, you've got to serve the entire field. And so in each issue, I was trying to make sure that there was a range of subfields were addressed. When I was choosing books, looking across subfields, looking across disciplines. So I was looking at catalogs from political science, from psychology, from sociology, as well as those that were marked communication or media studies on their forehead, and looking across publishers. And MIT is going to be my example, but when I wrote to MIT Press and said, please start sending me your catalogs so we can review your books, they said, we won't send you our catalogs because you never review our books. And I said, you're not sending us your catalogs. And finally they started, how do you choose reviewers? This is the most important point I want to make. It was an incredible intellectual exercise for me. When I was choosing reviewers, it was not a matter of throwing a book out there and saying, who wants it? I read in each of the subfields, I read in the literatures to which that book was speaking, and approached reviewers who I thought had a genuine conjunction with, had an issue that they would really want to engage with intellectually. So it was a very focused effort to try to move the conversation forward. And I'm frankly shocked by the number of book review editors who don't do that. It's an extraordinary opportunity to move the field forward by putting people together publicly in print form so you can engage in their conversation. What was accomplished? First of all, I think that all that reading that I did was, I had a great doctoral education at Minnesota, but this doubled it at least, if not tripled it, in terms of what I learned. And it prepared me for being a book series editor. I have the information policy series at MIT Press. I think it did contribute because I was insistently going to political science and sociology and psychology, et cetera, international relations, in addition to books marketed as communication and media studies. I think it did help the conversation that Bob mentioned of expanding the conversation between communication and other fields by bringing books in other fields to attention and vice versa, as those authors who got reviewed wanted to then speak back to communication and media. The individual conversations where I think successfully moved forward. And I'll go back to MIT Press, which I won't say there weren't any people in the field who had published with them before I got actively involved, but it was not until after the book of mine that won the 2022 ICA Fellows Book Award. I got heavily involved with that editor. He started coming to MIT Press. He started coming to ICA, Bob Pryor. My book was published in the Computer Science series. MIT was not working in our domain on its forehead. They launched new series that were more associated with our field, and now, of course, we have many authors who are publishing with MIT Press. So that was another way of using the book review section to increase the general visibility of the field and its engagement with conversations more broadly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Radhika Parameshwaran, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be on this panel. And Thomas, you did a fabulous job with my last name. We will talk later. I want to know how, you weren't challenged at all. Thank you. So I was I'm here to sort of represent communication, culture, and critique. As Thomas mentioned, it was founded in 2008. So it's only been about 17 years in existence, but heading towards the 25-year mark very soon. I was the third editor of the journal, and it was perhaps very fitting and appropriate that a person of Indian origins followed two British editors, right? And as I was getting mentored by them, we would often joke about that, yes? That, it was social justice that I followed. The creation of the journal, I still remember, was a remarkable and huge milestone for recognizing critical cultural studies, qualitative research, and broadly speaking, research that followed, a critical humanities tradition and the interpretive social sciences. And I'll just mention perhaps a banal point, but was very important for those of us who, do research that's almost entirely narrative, right? The word count when it started was 9,000 words, right? Which is remarkable for a full paper. When you look now, you see most of them are 6,000, 7,000, some go to 8,000. But I know 9,000 words was how it started. And then during my editorship, as a penalty of its popularity, it became 8,500. And when I recently looked, just last week, it's between 7,000 to 7,500 words, right? But at the time that I was publishing, that was the first thing I looked at. How many words, right? And how can I then bully the editor to give me 200 more? Yes, because that's what you end up doing, begging, right, for a few more words. So just a small thing, but nevertheless. And I have to say that by the time ICA Communication, Culture, and Critique was born within the framework of ICA, NCA had already had two journals entirely devoted to cultural studies and qualitative work. And those were Critical Studies in Media Communication, and the other journal is Communication and Critical/Cultural Studies, right? But for those of us for whom ICA was a primary home, it was a really, truly a moment of, feeling included, of being recognized. And the point that Thomas made is very crucial for many of us who wanted to publish in departments where most of the senior faculty went to ICA. even though this was a new journal, saying that you were in an ICA journal, right, became sort of code, a moment of translation, where you were suddenly legitimized. Oh, it's a new journal, but hello, it's within ICA, right? And so a profound moment of, a legitimation and translation, right, that was taking place. I myself was very fortunate, at the same time, I must say, to have been published in Journal of Communication and Communication Theory before I ever published in Communication Culture and Critique. So I want to give credit to those editors, right, who also recognize that. But, so I think all of it has to happen. Some of our work has to go in the broader journals. Some of it has to speak to the more hardcore inner community, right, within the concentric circle. And then I must say that it was also wonderful to have a journal where issues of inequality, gender, race, class, right, issues of cultural imperialism, and still inequity across the globe were not just variables, right? These could be taken upon, you could take them on as very central driving forces and arguments, right, as part of your research. And I will also say that, the journal was very much founded in a way well before I joined as editor, obviously, but many feminist scholars were very key in providing, the motivational fodder and their intellectual energies to founding the journal. And since then, the leadership, the first editor was Karen Ross, British feminist cultural studies person. Then we've had Melissa Click, Sarah Banet-Weiser, and then myself. I work in feminist cultural studies, post-colonial theory, and now we have Paula Chakravarti. So certainly a space for the leadership of women, and then here I am on this panel too, right? And so it's also provided, the space for diverse leadership, right, within ICA. Those are mine.
Thank you, Erin. I think that's worth an applause. Does any one of you want to comment on others' statements? Is there any need for that? Just give me a hand. No. Okay, then let's move on to
Pleasantly surprised by the diversity of things. I learned a lot.
Thank you, Sandra. Let's move on to the present. Now we come to the second question. And we mentioned this before, and I think we all agree that ICA journals and journals in general play or have important functions for our community, intellectually, strategically, and economically. At the same time, they're currently facing quite a few challenges around the transition to open access, for instance, questions about the role of activism and diversity. What are, in your view, the main challenges and issues or challenges to our journals currently in our field? Who wants to start?
Okay, let's mix it up and not have the women at the end this time. I'll just say two things. I think for book reviewing, the random reviewer assignments, which seems to be the norm, people putting out lists of books and saying, who wants a copy of the book, and completely wasting the opportunity that book reviews offer. And the second issue, which is an enduring issue, is the level of institutional support for editorial efforts. So I was lucky. I had 10 hours a week of the same excellent PhD student who assisted me throughout my 5 years. I was on the faculty of the Institute of Communications Research at the University of Illinois Urbana, and they also had office staff who were capable of taking care of a lot of the paperwork, and at that time, the wrapping of physical books and sending it around. One often course release can be useful to someone, even in the book review. I was spending 20 hours a week. I'm hopeless on that control of time. But so I think those are the two big issues I would point to in the present.
Thank you.
I can go next. So one of the issues, that ICA and even the journals, right, is global inclusivity. Continues to be a very big challenge, right? And I know that I face that as well. Getting people to publish from not just the global north, but various other countries. And of course, one of the profound, I would say, is a structural issue, that we can address with translation. Nevertheless, is that people have to write, at least when I was the editor, they had to write in English and publish and submit, right, manuscripts in English. And so one of the joys of my editorship. And I must say that I was not someone who had planned to be editor of a journal, right? It's not something really you plan for from when you get a PhD and join the academy. It's something that, you grow into, and in my case, I had very good mentors who persuaded me, and it turned out to be a very, very fulfilling experience. So in terms of global inclusivity, I had decided that special issues are always a challenge, because when you do special issues, then, people who are routinely submitting sometimes get delayed, right? And so you have to find a balance between publishing regular work and then the special issue. But one of the special issues that I published with working with one of the leaders in the field, Leslie Steeves from University of Oregon, was a special issue on Africa, media, and globalization. And bringing her on as a sort of, co-producer of this special issue was really, in hindsight, I think a very, very good and fulfilling decision for me, because she had worked, by the time she took on the special issue, she had worked in Africa, on Africa, and in partnership with scholars in Africa for more than 30 years. And so we were able to, produce an issue that included authors from Africa, reviewers from Africa. And then I think after that, ICA actually began a far more aggressive and timely outreach in Africa. And Leslie, actually, Paula Gardner and Leslie collaborated, and I know Paula pulled on much of the intellectual momentum of that special issue, right, to do that. And so I do think that, if we can think about special issues very strategically in terms of, global inclusivity, it can have results and good consequences, well past, its time.
Hello again, everybody. A couple of contemporary issues, I would say artificial intelligence and its production of really sometimes top manuscripts is a real challenge for us because we don't know what role this should play in the production of new information. On the other hand, it really will help people who may not have English as the first language to be able to adopt many of the norms of the scientific method that we have celebrated and benefited from so much over centuries, really. So I think it's an area that really is worth not only approaching with fear, but also as a great opportunity to improve, even much as I hate to say it, maybe reviewing manuscripts instead of just desk rejecting, at least giving them a little consideration through this. The second, and I think very serious challenge, is that of activism. I think all of us have a set of views that we think should be propagated to others. We view ourselves as being virtuous and wanting others to agree with us. And this plays out in the editorial review function, where certain ideas are not even going to be entertained by editors because, for example, they might be used to support a viewpoint that the editors don't agree with. So not that the work itself is bad, it could be actually excellent work, but the implications might serve a cause that's not favored by the editor. So I think this is one example of the perniciousness of activism. So I think we should seriously look at not only the benefits of being activists and improving the world and making it a better place and solving past injustices, but also what are the costs, what are the things that we're giving up by pursuing this that are also of value and should be of enduring value. Thank you.
Yeah, so, my editorship of Comp Theory was in the early 1990s, so that's quite distant from the present. But I think that some of the contrasts in the sort of editorial process and the job of an editor between then and now are of interest. So in the early 1990s, I mean, a huge change has taken place in the sort of technological infrastructure of journal editing. I mean, we did not have an online platform for review, a system for reviewing or submission. Everything was done, mostly by snail mail. You had to submit 4 hard copies of your manuscript. So there was a huge amount of paper, moving around and piled on desks and filing cabinets filling up and things getting lost in the mail and so forth. I mean, we had email, we had fax machines, but it was largely on paper. And we didn't have the technological infrastructure of editing that we do now. I think the result of that change has been largely positive, that the editorial process is a lot more efficient, it's less error prone, things don't get lost in the mail, et cetera, et cetera. It has, I think, had the effect of standardizing the publication process and the format of publications. And I think in that there has, the other big thing that didn't exist or hardly existed in the early 1990s is journal metrics. We just didn't have impact. I mean, maybe impact factor existed, I don't know, but it was not something that we were conscious of at all or took into account. And, sort of the journal metrics, as journal metrics have become more prominent as a basis for publication strategy, I think that also has had a kind of standardizing effect and has made the journals less open in a couple of ways. Well, one thing I was thinking about, Sandra was talking about book review sections. And, when you were editing the book review section of Journal of Communication, it was a vibrant, lively, important, it was a really important function. And if you published an important book in the field, there was a very high likelihood that it would get reviews in not just JOC, but several major journals. That's no longer the case. I mean, book reviews have largely, I mean, they haven't disappeared, but it's just, there are so many fewer book reviews than there used to be. And although I don't actually know, this is for somebody who's, is doing research in scholarly communication to look at, but I suspect that there's a connection between these technological developments, the online platforms and the journal metrics, and the decline of book reviews as something that's in our journals. And the other thing I wanted to mention is article length. So Radhika was talking about how in the early days of communication culture and critique, you could publish longer articles. I think that this standardization process that has happened through the technological infrastructure has made it almost impossible to publish a longer manuscript, in the field. And I think about, the communication theory and the early years of that journal. Some of the most impactful articles that we published, that I and the immediately following editors published, would be unpublishable today. You couldn't get it published. They're just too long. They would be desk rejected. So cut this by 50% and resubmit. Or something like that. I think that's a huge cost. The first article that I published in communication theory was Joseph Capella's article on the biological origins of automated patterns in human interaction. That article was at least twice as long. It took up about 40% of the first issue of the journal, at least twice as long as would be, an article that would even be looked at today. My own most cited article on communication theory as a field that came out in 1999 was, again, probably twice as long as the longest article that could be accepted in a journal now. And so I think it's a real cost, to the field that we no longer, editors no longer have the flexibility to decide to publish longer manuscripts when they feel that the quality would warrant it.
Before I talk about the current challenges, let me address the point that Bob just raised, which is about book reviews. And I fully agree with what Bob said, and that's why IJOC publishes a good number of book reviews every single month, about 12. That was Larry Gross's vision originally, that given the limited numbers of journals that publish book reviews in a systematic manner, he turned that into a centerpiece of IJOC, and we continue to do that. We have a book review editor, so that basically manages that. So anyway, about challenges, in no particular order or priority. The first one is the amount of submissions. I mean, everyone who's editing these days is just confronted increasingly with an exponentially growing number of submissions. And when I'm saying that is because it's very difficult to give the kind of feedback, detailed feedback that you should as an editor if you have significantly fewer in terms of why the paper might not be considered or is not sent out for review. That is a very difficult job, and it will continue to that because for all the journals I know and all the editors in the room know, that number continues to trend up, especially if you are editing a ICA journal for the reasons that we know. Second is, and this is not about moping, is finding reviewers. And I'm not going to say that. We always hear that. But there is it is an issue. And the question is, once we express the frustration with it, what do we do about it? Just asking people to review papers, we do it all the time. But I think that is an important issue that, we don't have an issue on. This runs on volunteering work. And it shows the limitations of volunteering work when everybody's busy and we have a growing number of a global community of scholars with more scholars, more papers, and more demands, more expectations for reviewers. So the third one is access, especially for people in the Global South, accessing journals that they cannot do it through their libraries, so on and so forth. That's another issue. And the other issue is the question of metrics. And I dealt with this with the 3 journals that I've edited, and when JOC, it was a clear issue that if you only prioritize metrics, you reduce diversity. Meaning, if you publish on the areas or the topics or the authors that are part of the larger community at ICA Communication Studies, your numbers are likely to go up just because of sheer math. But if you publish on something that is important, that is more of a niche area, and you have a great paper, and that paper probably is not from the global north, the chances are fewer that it's going to be, they're going to have the kind of numbers of that. So I always tell, whenever I was, metrics are important, but this is not the only reason why I'm doing a journal, right? So the question is how you prioritize all these different considerations. And in my mind, especially if you're editing an ICA journal, is a question of how you make compatible these multiple goals, including giving visibility to issues that may not be quote-unquote popular in terms of the number of scholars working on that, yet it is an important matter. And that to me is something consistently, so it's not just about the numbers. Numbers tell you one part of the story about the success of a journal. There's all kinds of other stories that need to be told about why and how an ICA journal especially does a good job, serves the community in its entirety. Thank you.
First thing I thought of was copy editing, but I don't want to talk about copy editing now. I want to give you a short story from my past to help you set the context for this. When my oldest son was in elementary school, he had to write sentences for his spelling words, so 20 words every week. And from 2nd grade to 4th grade, I helped him every week with writing these sentences. And I was very proud of the fact that every sentence that I recommended, fortunately Andrew didn't take all of these sentences, but every sentence that I recommended had the phrase capitalist pig dog in it. And that, I think, is frankly the biggest problem we're facing right now is the capitalist pig dogs. To go back to what I was saying with my son. Oxford doesn't give a crap about us as a discipline, except to the extent that we can make them money. Otherwise, they could give a fuck, excuse my language, and it really angers me. I proposed about 15 years ago addressing one of the issues that several people have addressed, because I have the same frustration in terms of manuscript length, because I was doing work on comprehension and I wanted to have both the theory piece and a program of research that was going to be about 90 pages published. And there's no way to do that, but that's the way it made sense. Present the theory and the stuff testing the theory and the modifications to the theory as they're occurring. And so I recommended to ICA that we start our own publishing house, following the rule of following APA's model. And that the first thing we would do would start publishing ebooks that were monographs. I don't think they were successful in getting the detenuring process started against me, even though I was threatened with that, I swear. No, I wasn't. But I think that's what we need to do, because we care about what we do. Oxford doesn't.
I just want to thank Silvio for bringing up, the citational politics and what a huge role that plays, because, if you're publishing on any part of the world that's not North America or the global North, you still have to cite all of them to make yourself legible, right? So I published a piece on in an NCA journal on, on feminist comedy on a YouTube channel, a hilarious show, with two young women talking mostly in restrooms, right, across Bombay. They're having these raunchy conversations, right, across Bombay. And of course, what we got back on the reviews was you have to cite every comedy canonic scholar in North America to make this understandable, right? And so, of course, then you do, but then the reverse rarely happens. If someone is publishing on a topic set in the global North, they're never told, please find a few scholars from the global South, right, and do some comparative analysis, right, to situate your work. And so, yeah, it is an ongoing challenge. I took on administration to some degree within my university just to make these types of arguments. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, if you work on Eritrea or Ethiopia, you are not going to get the same citations, right, as somebody who has done some work on, right? And so something to be conscious of as we, think about tenure, et cetera, et cetera.
Jim?
Thank you. Well, in 1957, Robert Merton wrote about the Matthew effect, and that is that those who are cited get more cited, and those who are little cited get less cited. So this is a problem, though, that we have not just with citations, but every dimension of human behavior. And of course, with social media, it's we get to see that in living color. But what I don't understand is, with all the unlimited opportunities to publish through digital media, the web and many other formats, why we face these constraints within our journals. Why don't we have a whole annex where you could have the small part and then have everything else as, for example, which they do in scientific magazines. You get all the data, you get to look at it, you get to see every step of the analysis, and what you see in the published form is just very brief. And so I don't understand the institutional barriers. And with reference to capitalism, well, there are other countries like China that doesn't have capitalistic organizations for their journals, but Fudan University has decided to sponsor it. Why don't we take this into our own hands? And why not create alternative mechanisms? And I think the answer is the Matthew effect. Everybody wants the leaders, and they're not going to put their efforts into the secondary channels. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking of metrics, I think we do have a response from Jonathan, and he's actually talking about this metrics. So I would like to ask Jonathan to come to the lectern to give his response, and then we will have still a couple of minutes for Q&A. There was one of the things that I still had on my list of questions, the question on journals and AI or generative AI, which is the elephant in the room. We might be able to pick up on this in the Q&A. I would just like to advertise that there is another panel focusing on generative AI and the transformational scholarship. It's in the next session. It's moderated by my colleague and friend, Noshir Contractor. But now over to the next, to the discussant. And could you please show the slides? Thank you.
So I'll do what academics do when they have nothing smart to say, which is to show some slides. So I asked an assistant just to go through the impact factors and rankings of these ICA journals since 2000 or whenever they were started. After that, I'll just as a brief note say, I asked ChatGPT to do that, and they gave me beautiful graphs that have nothing to do with reality, so someone actually had to do it. So talking about AI, that's part of it, because I actually checked it, and it was nothing to do with reality. So this is what the impact factors look like. On the whole, you see quite a rise. Our best journals are up in the 8s now, 6 to 8s. They started, when I remember before, I even started before this, but if you had a journal that was above 1, that was a big deal. Today, that would be a non-journal. So yes, impact factors are not the whole story, but they're certainly part of the story. And they give us some sense of what people are interested in and what they're looking at, even if it's not what we think is important at the moment. But they do give us a sense of the impact of some of this. So this is what it looks like. You see different journals are in different places, but overall, and I'll say some comments about it later, you see and the second thing, and this is the only two things I really have, is the percentile, because there's more research, so there's more citations, and the citation impacts go up in all journals. But if you want a relative view, this is what it looks like. But again, you see a pretty good sense. For the most part, we were up in the top between about 70 percentile and 100, so in the top third of communication journals in general, all the ICA journals, with a few drops here and there, and CCC hasn't quite made it up there yet, but it's made a nice jump. These data are until 2023, because the 24 data aren't all out yet, and so we didn't include them. So just a few comments on this. Yes, the past is done. This is what we've seen as the past. Future is unknown, but let's try and look at and see what we can come up with. So the impact factors are rising as the research community is larger and more productive, and we heard here comments about more submissions and the difficulty of finding reviewers, and that's just because more pressure on everyone to publish. Younger scholars, go in with 10, 15 articles to their first jobs. I got my first job without, I had something under review and that was it. Today they wouldn't even look at my CV. More scholars, more competition, people are publishing more, there's more pressure on them, and technology is part of that, but only part of that. And so there's more citations. The impact factors, so the rankings are also high, which is good news. With the exception of communication theory, that was a little unstable. If you go back to that for a minute, you can see communication theory is the sort of bluish line. It goes up and down a little bit more than the others, but also relatively okay. Most journals have in the past decade or so fluctuated within a range of 70 to 100%. It looks like the ICA journals are doing well and are going strong. I think the challenge is to maintain that and to see how, in an increasingly competitive market, we continue to do that. And I think choosing great editors like we've seen here is a big part of that. But there are struggles, and it's becoming more difficult, and finding ways of doing that is important. And I'd second Dave's call for some independent way of doing it. I will say that I don't think there's a lack of flexibility. We do have what Jim was suggesting. You can publish short form and then have all the data in supplementary files. We have that. That's done routinely in a lot of the journals. It's there. And indeed, if editors want to, they can publish longer forms. No one is stopping us from doing that. It's just that the feeling is for a lot of editors, people aren't going to read 70-page articles, so why publish them? And I would argue that a lot of the things, Bob, you were suggesting that were published, that were twice as long as would be published today, most of them probably could be half the length and nothing would happen. And those that weren't are exceptions. And today's editors can go to the publisher and say, listen, this is a really important piece. I want to double size, and they'll usually get it. The publishers will usually play along with that. So, or you can cut it up into 2 pieces and play it that way. But there is quite a bit of flexibility. So I think that's less of an issue than it's perceived to be. Editors often want to do things the way they want to do them, and it's not structural issues, but editors' preferences and what they see their audiences want or think that the audiences want, that's stopping that. But if you wanted to publish a 30 or 40 or 50-page article, you could do that as an editor, and it's been done. When I was at HCR, if someone wanted more space and we thought it was justified, say, go ahead, don't worry about it. And there was never an issue with the publisher. And so, but, people are used to certain forms, and if you want papers to be put in syllabi, if you do really long ones, professors aren't going to put them in the syllabi because students aren't going to read them. So there's all these other considerations, but this is not a structural issue. It's up to us to take these matters into our own hands and decide to do what we want to do. I think for me, that's it, but you can take it from here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Those space constraints were likely going to go away with all journals moving online only. So we probably have a different discussion in the future about that. And AI, of course, is going to be the big issue. And the other one is, as journals are moving open access around the world and publishers are turning their business models around to in terms of having authors paying for publications rather than readers pay for reading it. That is, of course, an issue that is actually looming large in Europe, for instance, now, because I would have to pay $3,500 to have an article published in JOC. And it's good because people in the Global South and universities in less wealthy areas in the world can read that article, but strong tier 1 research universities will have to invest a lot more resources into publishing. And so my colleagues are now thinking twice to publish in these journals because their budget will soon be exhausted. So this is just another challenge. But before we go into the Q&A, I would just like, again, to give another shout out to our new journal, the Global Perspectives in Communication. It's an open access journal. The founding editor, Nick Bauman, is in the room. So if you have any questions, please turn to him. And we are very proud of having the 7th journal in our portfolio and hope that we can broaden up the diversity of research that we publish by having the 7th journal. So now I think we have another 10 minutes for questions from the floor. So please raise your hand if you have any questions you would like to discuss with the panelists. Yes, Nick.
So thank you for the panel. Lots of notes over here. And stepping in, this is my 3rd editorship. And my views on special issues have evolved a lot over the years. So I used to think they're really great. Get new things in the idea, get people exposed to the journal. Hopefully they stick around and come back. But as I'm starting this new journal, I wonder if they end up marginalizing the very papers I'm trying to encourage. So if we have a new journal, because we have space for more scholarship, and a group from ICA wants a special issue, my conversations over the last couple of days have been, if you're feeling like you don't have room, maybe the answer isn't a special issue, it's submit to the new journal. Whereas if you had asked me 5-6 years ago, I would have said, yeah, it's great. You get a one shot to kind of narrow an idea and kick it out there. And I was just curious to hear your notes on that, because I was surprised how quickly I evolved on that. Because in my early editing days, special issues were like my answer for something new. But as I start to move on, I'm just wondering how many times people might just turn the page on them. Because if you just label it as, for example, in the open access debate, if you have an open science issue, what you're telling the community is, we had to make special space this one time, okay, back to normal. So I was just curious if you had notes on that, because I've surprised how much I've changed on that only in 10 years. So.
MediaPsych never had a special issue while I was editing it. CMM never had a special issue while I was editing it. We had one special issue in Annals because it was about an issue that both resulted, that what led to the development of the journal was an important issue for our discipline. We do special issues in JOC because generally it's expected, so there's a norm to do special issues. I personally have never wanted to put together one, and they don't do anything for me. So, but I think the ones that we have put together, I think they're outstanding. For sure. But that's just not, so I agree with you, it's never been my approach to editing.
To me, it's a question of real estate. In journals that I edited when it was very limited space, like JOC, a special issue means that I have fewer sort of less space for all kinds of issues that need to be there, and being sort of flagship journal, that's why probably a different journal. However, the journal that I edit now, they have much, much more space. Then we publish special issues almost every month on important matters that I think require sort of more focused attention. And we ask for a proposal that it is consistent with some of the basic expectations or sort of mission of the journal, and that is useful. But I mean, the question of space is huge here.
This has been very hard for. Oh, could I just address real quick? This has been very hard for me being up here, as much as I've had to agree with Silvio. I wanted to say one other thing, and it goes with the space issue. I will say I have published plenty of forums where we give the author less space. And the idea is this is starting to start a conversation. I am still very disappointed at how few people seem to have read the Elihu Katz one on the need to retire theories, because I thought that had a lot of important implications for our discipline. So it's not that I'm against having a bunch of articles on the same topic, but that I don't want to give as much space to it. As Silvia's pointed out, we don't have it. Sure. And I apologize for cutting you.
Oh, no, you did not, Dave. It's okay. I just wanted to say, the special issue I talked about, Nick, on Africa, definitely, I'm going to make the claim that, when I became the editor, definitely I did not want to sidestep or marginalize people who had been routinely, the people who are submitting. And I realized, I came in with some enthusiasm for it, and soon realized that it would be a form of injustice and inequity itself to delay all the people who had submitted, right? So definitely, there are material consequences, both in terms of space and in terms of the temporal rhythm that others need, right, for their own upward mobility, particularly graduate students, assistant professors, et cetera. And that was a time when definitely, coming out in print mattered as well, in some way or fashion, online or, being published. But I do think that, the thought that I put into the special issue that I designed, on Africa, came out because when you look at the field of global media studies or global media and communication, South Asia dominated, a lot. So I knew I would do nothing on South Asia, even though that's the area I work in. So it became a very important thing for me, so that you have forms of exclusion that are more subtle, right, that people don't realize. And part of it was certainly that, thanks to the British, or, bloody hell to the British, right? We inherited the English language, right, from South Asia. So therefore, I decided that it was important, and it was the only special issue we did.
Okay.
You see? But I put a lot of energy and effort into it, and I wanted it to have a lot of impact. The second quick thing I'll say is that now that we've moved so much into, digital publishing and digital spaces, I see some editors very cleverly just collating pieces that are on a special topic and creating ad hoc special issues, right? Which are quite helpful, actually. And some of them are older, some of them more recent. I actually like that, so that you can see what was being said about this topic, 10 years. So there's an agility and a flexibility due to the affordances, right, of digital media. But I am with you that it has to be a very carefully thought out decision with an eye on, impact.
I appreciate that, because I was nervous, and I'll step the floor, of course, but I almost felt like it was almost a desperation. It was like, could you give me the space? And I was starting to realize that the space you may be getting might actually be worsening the situation if we just continue to turn the page and move on after that. And I like the notion of, being new, we can establish a rhythm from time zero. So thank you very much for the notes.
I have Jim and then Sandra.
I just wanted to make a quick annotation that given the microclimates of different sub-specialties, it's a great idea for the people in that special issue to get to know one another and build connections. So actually, it can be very beneficial in terms of intellectual progress if you can develop one of those. Thank you.
I just wanted to add on the special issue. One thing that you're signaling to the readership, and there are those editors who actually do one after another for journals where that goes up and down, and it's often a sign, frankly, of weak editorial strength, or you may be signaling that you're not receiving enough submissions, and so you want to be careful on that. I think about special issues a lot as an editor of a book series, because my criteria for an edited volume are very, very demanding, and I distinguish between the level of intellectual coherence that I would require for an edited volume of my series, where there has to be speaking to a common theoretical frame and those kinds of things. So if it's loose, and it has to be in an area where nothing has been done, so it's providing real intellectual leadership for the book. So those standards are lower and can be useful, for the journal issue.
A little contrapoint from my personal experience, because when I took over communication theory as an editor, and you might remember the chart that Jonathan presented, it didn't do extremely well. So I think special issues can be a very relevant strategic tool to expand audience and diversity. So when I started my editorship, I noticed that there were communities in our field who felt this is not my journal. So I reached out to them and I said, well, can you do a special issue on mediatization, for instance, so to get the cultural studies communities involved in the journal? And I think that is particularly relevant in the early beginnings of a journal. But of course, I agree with everyone that needs to be thought well, and it's also a matter of space. Now, this is a hybrid session. We should not forget about that. And there is a question. Could you please read, Jeff, the question in the microphone?
Sure. I've just been monitoring the chat online, and the question that just came in from a self-identified Marco Polo is, excuse me, how do we balance academic rigor with accessibility to ensure ICA journals reach more audiences? And this is a theme you've already been talking about, obviously, throughout, and there are only 2 minutes left, but Marco Polo.
Short answers, please.
I was told in graduate school that it's not a crime to write well, even if you're a scholar, and I think that's one thing we could emphasize. And the great C.C. Lee always said, even your dissertation could be under 100 pages. None of us succeeded in doing that. But I think there's something in the culture there.
I must say that as the editor of CCC, where we had, papers that were written, with lots of dense writing, yes, I think accessibility is important, but we also have to recognize that there's creativity in writing. Yes, and so finding a balance, between accessibility and an openness to, creativity and not sacrificing complexity. But I went back and looked at my own, every editor gets to write a short, here is what I will emphasize as an editor. And I went back and looked at mine, and I said, we're open to every approach, and you bring on quantitative. If you're going to use a critical cultural framework and use numbers, of course, please do that, right? But one of the things I did emphasize that is that within the boundaries of language density, try to be more accessible, right? And so I think it's an ongoing challenge, yeah.
Jim?
Very quickly, I just would point to best practices in the hard sciences where they have short summaries that are accessible to everybody, and then they have a significance section, and then they give the standard, what we love of the APA format. But it's not an ideal way for accessibility to do the APA format. And I'm glad, once again, the hard sciences are giving us cutting-edge examples that we could follow in our field of communication, which we are supposed to be experts at. And we should use our tools to address this question by being original and creative in the way we put together our materials that we distribute. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I
Can I say one real quick thing?
I'm sorry. Oh, cool.
I always go over. The other thing is blogs. My work on cooperative gaming and making violent video games good has been written up in more blogs than I can imagine. And I was asked to start doing a blog for Forbes on media psychology. We did a lot of negotiations. First one I turned in was about the attacks on journalists and Black Lives Matter movements, and they said, well, can you add more about how this impacts business? And I said, no, find someone else. But I think I think we need to do more blogging. I mean, that's one of the things I plan to do in a year or two when I retire.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We are already running over time, so please join me in thanking all panelists. That was a wonderful panel. Thanks for joining, and enjoy the rest of the conference.